September 12, 1943. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo, Japan. Commander Keiji Shibasaki spread the reconnaissance photographs across the mahogany table, his lips curling into a contemptuous smile. "Look at this," Shibasaki said, tapping the images with his riding crop. "The Americans believe they can assault a fortified atoll with these toy boats." Captain Tado Onuki, Naval Intelligence Section Chief, leaned forward and nodded vigorously. "Their landing craft are slow, vulnerable, and require perfect tidal conditions they will never achieve at Tarawa." Lieutenant Commander Takeo Sugai, Assistant Intelligence Officer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair and cleared his throat. "Commander, our sources indicate the Americans have developed new amphibious vehicles and unprecedented production capacity for landing craft." But Shibasaki waved him off dismissively. "Sugai, we have fortified Betio with 500 pillboxes, 4,500 troops, and coastal defenses that make beach assault mathematically impossible. No amphibious assault has ever succeeded against prepared defenses of this magnitude. At Wake Island, 449 Marines surrendered to 1,500 Japanese defenders. At Bataan, 76,000 Allied troops capitulated to 50,000 Japanese forces. At Singapore, 85,000 British Commonwealth soldiers surrendered to 36,000 Japanese troops. The mathematics were undeniable. Fortified positions defeated amphibious assaults at ratios of 3-to-1 or better. What Shibasaki didn't know, what none of them could have known as they studied those photographs in that oak-paneled conference room, was that American amphibious warfare doctrine would land 18,000 Marines on Betio's beaches within 3 hours. The numbers would become catastrophic. 35,000 American landing craft produced versus Japan's 1,200. 2,400 specialized amphibious vehicles operational versus Japan's 0. 4,690 Japanese defenders annihilated in 76 hours. The confident laughter in that Tokyo headquarters would become history's most expensive miscalculation, measured in the complete destruction of Japan's impregnable Pacific fortress. Commander Keiji Shibasaki had earned his confidence through blood. At the Battle of Java Sea, his cruiser division had sunk 5 Allied vessels without losing a single ship, achieving a 5-to-0 ratio. During the invasion of Wake Island, forces under his tactical command had overcome American defenders despite the Americans' initial advantage of fortified positions and air support. The December 1941 assault had cost Japanese forces 820 casualties, but resulted in complete victory. At the Battle of Sunda Strait, Shibasaki's tactical recommendations had led to the sinking of USS Houston and HMAS Perth with 0 Japanese losses, demonstrating Japanese naval superiority at a ratio of 2-to-0. His service record included 6 major engagements, 4 decisive victories, and 2 tactical draws against superior forces. The Imperial Navy had decorated him 3 times for tactical excellence. Shibasaki's current command, the fortification of Betio Island in the Tarawa Atoll, represented the pinnacle of Japanese defensive engineering. The island measured 2 miles long and 800 yards at its widest point. Japanese engineers had constructed 500 reinforced concrete pillboxes, each with walls 4 feet thick. They had positioned 40 artillery pieces ranging from 7 to 8-inch coastal guns. They had installed 14 Type 95 light tanks in prepared positions. The garrison numbered 4,690 troops, including 2,619 elite Rikusen Special Naval Landing Force troops and 2,071 skilled naval construction personnel trained for combat. The defensive perimeter included 500 yards of coconut log barriers, thousands of mines, and barbed wire obstacles extending 50 yards into the lagoon. Every approach had been registered for artillery fire. Every beach sector had been surveyed and fortified. Shibasaki had personally inspected every major defensive position. American amphibious operations had failed repeatedly in recent years. The deep raid in August 1942 had resulted in 3,367 Canadian casualties out of 4,963 troops committed, a 68% casualty rate against prepared German defenses. The landing craft had proven vulnerable to coastal artillery, with 33 of 179 vessels destroyed before troops could disembark. The Guadalcanal landings in August 1942 had succeeded only because Japanese forces had not yet fortified the beaches, and even then, American casualties exceeded 7,000 over 6 months. The North Africa landings in November 1942 had faced minimal opposition, yet still resulted in significant losses to mechanical failures and poor coordination. No Allied force had successfully assaulted a heavily fortified beach against prepared defenders with modern weapons. The historical record showed that amphibious assaults against concrete fortifications ended in catastrophic failure. Gallipoli had cost 44,000 Allied lives. The failed assault on Dakar had demonstrated that modern coastal defenses could repel amphibious forces with devastating efficiency. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Sugai studied the intelligence reports with growing unease. American shipyard production had increased dramatically in 1943. In January 1943, American yards had launched 19 amphibious vessels. By March 1943, monthly production had reached 67 amphibious craft. By June 1943, production exceeded 140 vessels monthly. Intelligence intercepts indicated the Americans were developing specialized amphibious tractors capable of crossing reef barriers. The intercepted transmissions mentioned Amtrac, vehicles with waterproof hulls and tracked propulsion. Sugai had submitted 3 separate reports to headquarters detailing these developments. Each report included production statistics, technical specifications, and tactical assessments. Each report had been filed with minimal comment. When Sugai had presented his findings to Shibasaki directly, the commander had dismissed them. Lieutenant Commander, production numbers mean nothing if their vessels cannot survive coastal artillery. Our 8-inch guns can destroy any landing craft at 2,000 yards. Their production capacity is irrelevant if every vessel is sunk before reaching the beach. Petty Officer First Class Tadashi Yamada had witnessed Japanese amphibious superiority firsthand during the invasion of Wake Island. He had been part of the second assault wave on December 23, 1941, and had seen how Japanese planning and execution had overcome American defenses. The Americans had possessed coastal guns, air support, and prepared positions. Japanese forces had landed successfully through superior tactics and aggressive infantry assault. Yamada had personally observed American defenders surrendering when Japanese forces bypassed their fortifications through rapid maneuver. The Wake Island operation had proven that determined assault forces could overcome defensive positions if they accepted casualties and maintained momentum. At Tarawa, the defenses were incomparably stronger. The pillboxes were reinforced concrete rather than coral and sand. The artillery was pre-registered and professionally sighted. The garrison was 3 times larger. The approaches were mined and obstructed. Yamada believed the island was genuinely impregnable to amphibious assault. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. San Francisco, California, March 1943. Donald Roebling inspected the assembly line at the Food Machinery Corporation plant, watching as another LVT-2 water buffalo rolled toward the testing area. The facility produced 17 amphibious tractors daily. Every 8 hours, another tracked amphibious vehicle completed assembly, underwent waterproofing tests, and prepared for shipment to marine amphibious training facilities. In January 1942, America produced just 15 amphibious tractors monthly, all experimental prototypes with limited capabilities. By September 1942, production reached 89 LVT-1 vehicles monthly as the design matured and production lines expanded. By March 1943, the San Francisco facility alone was producing 510 amphibious tractors monthly, with each vehicle capable of carrying 20 combat-loaded Marines across reef barriers that stopped conventional landing craft. This single facility was producing more amphibious assault vehicles than the entire Japanese Empire had constructed in its history. Margaret Anderson, previously a riveter at the Oakland aircraft plant, now operated the hull welding station for LVT-2 production, completing 34 hull welds per shift. Each weld had to maintain waterproof integrity to depths of 12 feet and withstand salt water corrosion. She worked 10-hour shifts, 6 days weekly, producing more welded amphibious vehicle hulls in 1 month than the entire Imperial Japanese Navy had manufactured in all of 1942. Her welding torch consumed 4.2 pounds of welding rod hourly. Japan allocated 2.1 pounds of welding rod monthly per military construction project. Margaret's single station used more welding supplies in 3 hours than a Japanese naval construction unit received in a month. She produced 6 complete hull assemblies daily. At this rate, her individual output exceeded the monthly production capacity of Japan's largest naval vehicle manufacturing facility in Yokosuka, which could complete 4 amphibious vehicles monthly under optimal conditions. Her supervisor calculated that Margaret personally welded enough hulls monthly to equip an entire Marine Division's amphibious assault battalion. James Washington, from Detroit, Michigan, operated the engine installation bay that mounted and tested the Continental W679A radial engines in each completed hull. His station processed 8 engine installations daily, conducting compression tests, ignition system verification, and power output validation for every unit. Each engine generated 250 horsepower and could propel a fully loaded amphibious tractor at 7.5 miles per hour in water and 25 miles per hour on land. His single station's daily output exceeded the entire monthly production capacity of Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries amphibious vehicle program, which could install 3 engines monthly in tracked vehicles. Washington personally installed 48 engines weekly. Japanese engineers installed 12 engines monthly across all military amphibious programs. His individual productivity exceeded Japan's national amphibious vehicle engine production by a ratio of 4-to-1. The engines he installed in 1 week could power more amphibious assault vehicles than Japan could field in the entire Pacific theater. Andrew Higgins, $1-a-year man from Higgins Industries, managed the coordination between West Coast tractor production and Gulf Coast landing craft manufacturing. His plants in New Orleans produced 700 LCVP landing craft monthly, each capable of carrying 36 troops or a single vehicle. The combined output from his Louisiana facilities and the California tractor plants exceeded 1,200 amphibious vessels monthly by mid-1943. Higgins had revolutionized production through modular construction techniques, prefabricated sections, and assembly line methods borrowed from automobile manufacturing. His plants operated 3 shifts daily, 24 hours continuously, producing landing craft and support vessels at rates that defense planners had initially dismissed as impossible. A single Higgins plant produced more amphibious vessels monthly than Japan's entire shipbuilding industry could construct in 6 months. Americans discarded 14,000 pounds of aluminum shavings daily at the Food Machinery Corporation plant during tractor hull manufacturing. Japan allocated 2,400 pounds of aluminum monthly to each naval construction facility. The waste from a single day's manufacturing exceeded Japan's monthly allocation by a ratio of nearly 6-to-1. Workers swept the aluminum fragments into collection barrels for recycling, but during 1943 production surges, the recycling capacity couldn't process all the scrap. Maintenance crews disposed of aluminum waste that Japanese engineers would have carefully collected, sorted, and allocated to critical manufacturing programs. The discarded metal represented enough raw material to construct 40 Japanese aircraft engines. The waste from single-shift operations at the San Francisco facility exceeded Japan's total monthly amphibious vehicle production capacity. Defective welds that failed waterproofing tests resulted in hull sections being scrapped and replaced. Quality control rejected approximately 3% of completed hulls for minor defects. These rejected hulls, which Americans discarded and replaced, exceeded the monthly production output of Japan's 2 primary military vehicle manufacturing facilities combined. The rejected components could have equipped a Japanese amphibious assault unit. American quality standards demanded perfection. Japanese scarcity demanded using whatever could be produced. Workers threw away welding rod stubs that Japanese manufacturers rationed by the gram. Each welding station generated approximately 2.1 pounds of unusable rod ends daily, as welders couldn't use the final 2 inches of each rod without compromising weld quality. They discarded these stubs into scrap containers. Japanese welders carefully collected every fragment, melted down the metal, and reformed it into usable rod. The waste from 50 American welding stations exceeded Japan's monthly welding rod allocation for an entire naval construction battalion. Americans threw away more welding supplies in 1 week than Japanese shipyards received in a month. The cafeteria at the Food Machinery Corporation plant discarded more beef daily than Betio's entire garrison received monthly. The facility employed 4,200 workers across 3 shifts, and the cafeteria served 12,600 meals daily. Food waste from a single day exceeded 800 pounds, including meat scraps, spoiled produce, and uneaten portions. Betio's garrison of 4,690 troops received 340 pounds of meat weekly as standard rations, supplemented by 180 pounds of fish. The American factory cafeteria threw away more protein in 4 days than Japanese troops on Betio received in an entire month. Workers complained about food quality while eating meals that Japanese soldiers would have considered luxurious. Cost overruns and production waste from the amphibious tractor program could have built Japan's entire amphibious warfare fleet twice over. Approximately $47 million in cost overruns occurred during 1943 production expansion, representing budget excesses, design modifications, and manufacturing inefficiencies. This wasted money exceeded the total budget of Japan's amphibious warfare development program from 1937 to 1943. The Americans spent more on fixing production problems than Japan had invested in developing its entire amphibious assault capability. This single aspect of wasteful American abundance exceeded the comprehensive, carefully planned Japanese amphibious program that had conquered a quarter of the Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Sugai reviewed the latest intelligence reports with mounting concern. American amphibious vessel production had reached extraordinary levels. His calculations showed American shipyards producing 1,200 landing craft monthly by mid-1943, including 700 LCVP boats, 310 LCM medium landing craft, 140 LCT tank landing craft, and 50 LSD tank landing ships. Japanese intelligence had confirmed 17 American shipyards dedicated solely to amphibious vessel production. Production rates were accelerating rather than plateauing. Sugai projected that by November 1943, American forces could deploy more than 15,000 landing craft across the Pacific, Mediterranean, and Atlantic theaters. Japan's entire amphibious fleet numbered 1,240 vessels, most of which were converted merchant ships or improvised barges rather than purpose-built assault craft. The production disparity was becoming catastrophic. A single American facility produced more dedicated amphibious assault vehicles monthly than Japan's entire industrial base could manufacture annually. November 20, 1943, Betio Island, Tarawa Atoll, 5:44 hours. Petty Officer First Class Tadashi Yamada was conducting the morning inspection of Coastal Defense Position 7 when the horizon erupted with fire. At 5:44 hours, USS Maryland's 16-inch guns opened fire from 16,000 yards. At 5:44 hours and 18 seconds, the first shells impacted the beach 200 yards from Yamada's position. The concussion knocked him off his feet. At 5:45 hours, USS Colorado joined the bombardment with 8 16-inch guns. At 5:46 hours, USS Tennessee and USS Pennsylvania added their 14-inch batteries. At 5:47 hours, 4 heavy cruisers commenced firing with their 8-inch guns. By 5:50 hours, the entire northern coast of Betio was under continuous naval bombardment from 10 capital ships firing at maximum rate. The bombardment lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At 8:24 hours, the naval guns ceased firing. Yamada climbed from his shelter and assessed the damage. The coconut trees had vanished, reduced to shattered stumps. Smoke obscured everything beyond 50 yards. The landscape had been transformed into a moonscape of craters. At 8:30 hours, Yamada heard a new sound, the distinctive rattle of tracked vehicles in water. At 8:32 hours, the first wave of LVT amphibious tractors emerged from the smoke, crossing the reef that conventional landing craft could not traverse. At 8:34 hours, Yamada counted 87 tractors in the first wave. At 8:35 hours, Marines began disembarking on the beach. Coastal Defense Position 7 engaged the landing craft with 70 guns. At 8:36 hours, Japanese gunners destroyed their first LVT. Elapsed time from engagement to destruction, 47 seconds. Kill time, 47 seconds. At 8:37 hours, a second tractor exploded under direct hits. Kill time, 38 seconds. At 8:38 hours, a third LVT burned on the reef. Kill time, 41 seconds. But at 8:38 hours, Marine riflemen had already reached the seawall. At 8:39 hours, Marines were flanking the coastal defense position. At 8:41 hours, the position fell to flamethrowers and demolition charges. Elapsed time from first Marine touchdown to position elimination, 7 minutes. At 8:43 hours, more LVTs crossed the reef. At 8:44 hours, the second wave landed with 75 more amphibious tractors. At 8:47 hours, the third wave arrived with another 68 tractors. Total first-hour engagement on Red Beach 1. 3 hours from initial landing to 600 yards of beach secured. Enemy losses: 12 amphibious tractors destroyed, 45 Marines killed, 91 Marines wounded. Japanese losses: 340 defenders killed, 8 defensive positions destroyed, 200 yards of primary defensive line breached. Kill ratio favored defenders at 1. 1 for personnel but favored attackers at 28, 1 for defensive positions eliminated. The ammunition expended in this 3-hour engagement by American naval forces exceeded the monthly allocation for the entire Tarawa garrison's coastal defense batteries. The naval bombardment alone had fired 2,800 tons of high-explosive shells. Betio's entire ammunition stockpile totaled 840 tons for all weapons. Commander Keiji Shibasaki was in his command bunker when the naval bombardment commenced. The reinforced concrete structure, built with walls 6 feet thick and a roof of steel rails overlaid with 3 feet of concrete and 4 feet of coral sand, shook with each impact. The electric lights failed at 6:02 hours. Emergency lanterns provided minimal illumination. Communications lines to forward positions were cut by 6:15 hours. At 7:20 hours, a near-direct hit collapsed part of the bunker's entrance, requiring engineers to clear the rubble. Shibasaki attempted to coordinate defensive fire, but without communications to forward observers, the coastal batteries fired blindly into the smoke. At 8:35 hours, a runner arrived reporting that amphibious tractors were crossing the reef. Shibasaki had dismissed the intelligence reports about these vehicles. At 8:52 hours, another runner reported that Marines had breached the seawall at Red Beach 1. The assault was proceeding faster than any defensive plan had anticipated. Commander Shibasaki issued orders for counterattacks, but coordinating forces proved impossible without functioning communications. At 9:40 hours, he received reports that Marines had pushed 150 yards inland. At 10:15 hours, reports indicated Americans had destroyed 15 defensive positions on the northern coast. At 11:20 hours, observers reported that conventional landing craft were now crossing the partially submerged reef, delivering additional troops, vehicles, and supplies. The tide was rising. What Shibasaki had counted on, the reef barrier keeping landing craft away from the beach, had been overcome by specialized vehicles. The Marines were reinforcing faster than Japanese forces could mount counterattacks. At 1200 hours, Shibasaki ordered his reserve forces to prepare for a night counterattack. Japanese doctrine emphasized night combat, where superior Japanese infantry training could overcome American firepower advantages. Intelligence had dismissed the reports about American amphibious tractors as exaggerations or propaganda. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Sugai had submitted detailed assessments about the LVT program, including specifications, production numbers, and tactical implications. His reports had been filed but not acted upon. The assumption had been that no amphibious vehicle could cross Tarawa's reef while carrying enough troops to matter. Intelligence analysts had calculated that any tracked vehicle capable of reef crossing would be too slow, too vulnerable, and too lightly armed to survive the approach under fire. The mathematics seemed straightforward. Crossing 600 yards of reef at 4 miles per hour required 9 minutes of exposure to coastal artillery. No lightly armored vehicle could survive 9 minutes of concentrated fire from pre-registered guns. Therefore, reef-crossing vehicles posed no threat. The Americans had developed vehicles that crossed the reef in 7 minutes, operated in waves of 80-plus vehicles that saturated defensive fire, and delivered Marines who immediately assaulted defensive positions rather than consolidating on the beach. The entire Japanese defensive doctrine assumed attackers would pause on the beach to reorganize, providing time for counterattacks. Lieutenant Commander Sugai had warned headquarters that American amphibious doctrine emphasized continuous assault momentum. His intelligence briefs had analyzed the Guadalcanal landings, noting how American forces immediately pushed inland rather than consolidating beachheads. He had studied after-action reports from the North Africa landings, observing how American forces used overwhelming numbers to compensate for tactical inexperience. He had noted the trend in American training toward combined arms operations, where naval gunfire, air support, and amphibious vehicles coordinated to suppress defenses before infantry landed. His October 1943 brief had specifically warned that Tarawa's defenses assumed a conventional amphibious assault using landing craft that required deep water. If Americans deployed reef-crossing vehicles, the entire defensive plan became obsolete. His warning had been acknowledged and filed. No defensive modifications had been implemented. The statistics should have been alarming. American production of amphibious vehicles had increased from 0 in 1940 to 510 monthly by mid-1943. American landing craft production exceeded 1,200 vessels monthly. American amphibious assault training facilities in California and North Carolina were processing 2,500 Marines monthly through specialized landing operations courses. The Americans were producing the vehicles, training the personnel, and developing the doctrine for large-scale amphibious operations at an industrial pace. Japan's amphibious capability remained static, with fewer than 100 specialized landing craft produced in 1943. A single American facility exceeded Japan's entire national production. The disparity was 12-to-1 in vehicles, 20-to-1 in trained assault personnel, and impossible to calculate in terms of supporting logistics. Americans were conducting amphibious operations with mechanized efficiency, while Japan relied on improvisation and adaptation of conventional infantry tactics. They tried massing artillery fire on the reef approaches, concentrating all available guns on the landing zones. The Americans suppressed the artillery positions with naval gunfire, destroying 18 of 40 artillery pieces in the first 2 hours of bombardment. They attempted to concentrate machine gun fire on the tractors as they crossed the reef. The Americans deployed 87 tractors in the first wave, saturating defensive fire that could only engage a fraction of the vehicles. They launched counterattacks with reserve infantry to push Marines back into the sea. American naval gunfire destroyed the counterattacking forces before they reached the Marines, with 16-inch shells obliterating assembly areas. They tried infiltrating Marine positions at night using superior Japanese night fighting techniques. American illumination rounds, flares, and searchlights turned night into day, eliminating the visibility advantage. Every Japanese tactical doctrine, proven in previous island campaigns, failed against American material superiority. November 21, 1943, Betio Island, 6:15 hours. At 6:15 hours, Japanese forces launched a major counterattack against Marine positions on Red Beach 2. Approximately 300 elite Rikusentai troops advanced in a coordinated assault supported by 3 Type 95 tanks. At 6:18 hours, USS Ringgold positioned 1,200 yards offshore engaged with 5-inch guns. At 6:19 hours, the first tank exploded. Elapsed time from engagement to destruction, 35 seconds. Kill time, 35 seconds. At 6:20 hours, the second tank burned. Kill time, 42 seconds. At 6:21 hours, the third tank was destroyed. Kill time, 38 seconds. At 6:22 hours, Marine artillery concentrated on the infantry assault. At 6:27 hours, the counterattack collapsed. Total engagement duration, 12 minutes. Enemy losses, 247 dead, 3 tanks destroyed, attack objectives completely unachieved. American losses, 11 Marines killed, 23 wounded. Kill ratio, 22, 1 in favor of defenders who were technically the counterattacking force. The ammunition expended by USS Ringgold in this 12-minute engagement exceeded the weekly allocation for the entire Japanese garrison's field artillery. At 11:40 hours on November 21st, Japanese forces attempted another counterattack on the southern perimeter. Approximately 180 troops attacked Marine positions that had penetrated 400 yards inland. At 11:42 hours, Marine M4 Sherman tanks engaged. At 11:43 hours, first enemy positions destroyed. Kill time, 28 seconds per fortified position. At 11:45 hours, Marine infantry advanced under tank cover. At 11:51 hours, the counterattack was broken. Total engagement, 11 minutes. Japanese losses, 164 killed. Marine losses, 7 killed, 14 wounded. The fuel consumed by 4 Sherman tanks during this 11-minute engagement exceeded the weekly fuel allocation for the entire Japanese garrison's vehicle fleet. The Sherman tanks had burned 80 gallons of fuel maneuvering and engaging targets. Japanese forces received 65 gallons weekly for 14 trucks and 3 operational tanks. At 18:25 hours on November 21st, Japanese forces launched a final coordinated counterattack attempting to split American positions. Approximately 400 troops attacked in 3 columns. At 1827 hours, naval gunfire commenced. At 1829 hours, Marine artillery joined. At 1831 hours, American machine guns opened fire. At 1837 hours, the attack stalled. At 1843 hours, Japanese forces retreated. Total engagement, 18 minutes. Japanese losses, 311 killed. American losses, 19 killed, 37 wounded. Kill ratio, 16:1. The ammunition expenditure during this 18-minute engagement exceeded the monthly allocation for 2 Japanese infantry battalions. USS Pennsylvania alone fired 342 rounds of 14-inch ammunition. The Japanese garrison's entire heavy artillery ammunition stockpile contained 280 rounds of comparable caliber. Commander Keiji Shibasaki personally led a late-night counterattack on November 21st at 23:40 hours. He assembled 75 elite troops from his headquarters guard for a final attempt to penetrate Marine positions near the airfield. At 23:43 hours, American sentries detected the movement. At 23:44 hours, illumination rounds lit the battlefield. At 23:45 hours, Marine machine guns engaged. At 23:46 hours, Shibasaki was shot while leading the assault. At 23:47 hours, the counterattack collapsed. At 23:48 hours, Japanese forces retreated, leaving 63 dead, including Commander Shibasaki. Elapsed time from engagement to Shibasaki's death, 180 seconds. Total attack duration, 8 minutes. This wasn't combat in any traditional sense. This was systematic annihilation of attacking forces by defenders with unlimited ammunition, perfect visibility, and overwhelming firepower superiority. Marines expended approximately 45,000 rounds of rifle and machine gun ammunition, stopping this attack. The Japanese garrison's entire small arms ammunition reserve totaled 1.2 million rounds for 4,690 troops, approximately 255 rounds per defender for the entire battle. The pattern repeated throughout November 22nd. At 6:40 hours, Japanese counterattack destroyed in 14 minutes. At 10:20 hours, another assault broken in 9 minutes. At 14:45 hours, final organized resistance collapsed. By 18:30 hours on November 22nd, organized Japanese defense had ceased. American forces controlled 95% of Betio Island. Japanese survivors were isolated in small groups without command coordination, communications, or supply. The battle effectively ended 76 hours after the first Marines landed. Total Japanese losses, 4,690 killed, 17 captured. Total American losses, 980 killed, 2,193 wounded. The Americans had lost men but achieved complete tactical victory. The ammunition and naval shells expended during the 76-hour battle exceeded the total ammunition allocation for the Japanese garrison for an entire year of defense. The fuel consumed by American vehicles during 3 days of combat exceeded the fuel Japanese forces had stockpiled for 6 months of operations. Enemy officers later analyzed the defeat. This wasn't combat between comparable forces where superior tactics or training determined victory. This was industrial warfare where one side possessed unlimited ammunition, fuel, equipment, and reinforcements, while the other operated under severe resource constraints. Every American advantage derived from production capacity. The amphibious tractors that crossed the reef came from factories producing 510 monthly. The Sherman tanks that destroyed Japanese positions represented production of 1,200 tanks monthly across all American facilities. The naval bombardment came from a fleet that American shipyards could replace and expand annually. The ammunition expenditure that seemed wasteful to Japanese observers represented a tiny fraction of American monthly production. Americans could expend ammunition freely because factories produced shells faster than military forces could fire them. Japan rationed every bullet because production could barely maintain reserves. May 1944, prisoner interrogation facility, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Sugai sat across from American intelligence officers, providing detailed testimony about Japanese defensive planning and intelligence assessments. We were not defeated by better soldiers, but by better factories. Your single facility in San Francisco produced 510 amphibious tractors monthly. Our entire empire produced fewer than 100 specialized landing craft in all of 1943. A single American factory produced more amphibious assault capability than our entire national industrial base. We calculated force ratios, defensive positions, and tactical advantages. We never calculated the ratio of your industrial capacity to ours. That ratio was approximately 15, 1 in steel production, 10, 1 in shipbuilding, 20, 1 in amphibious vehicle manufacturing. You defeated us with production capacity before your Marines landed. Sugai continued his analysis with painful precision. Your landing force of 18,000 Marines arrived in waves over 3 hours because you possessed enough amphibious vehicles to transport an entire division rapidly. Our largest amphibious operation could move 3,000 troops over 12 hours because we lacked sufficient vessels. Your naval bombardment expended 2,800 tons of high explosive in 3 hours. Our entire garrison stockpile totaled 840 tons for extended defense. You expended 3 times our total ammunition in the preliminary bombardment. The mathematics were impossible. We calculated you could land 5,000 troops daily. You landed 18,000 in 3 hours. We calculated you might employ 30 amphibious vehicles. You deployed 242 specialized tractors in the first 6 hours. Every calculation based on your previous operations proved wrong because your production capacity expanded exponentially between operations. Petty Officer First Class Tadashi Yamada provided testimony about the combat experience. I saw 87 amphibious tractors emerge from the smoke simultaneously during the first assault wave. Our defensive doctrine assumed landing craft would approach individually or in small groups, allowing concentrated fire to destroy vessels before troops landed. Your tractors crossed the reef in 7 minutes, moving faster than intelligence had predicted. We destroyed 12 tractors in the first hour. You landed 18,000 troops. The mathematics became absurd. We could destroy vehicles, but you possessed so many that our successful defensive fire achieved nothing. You didn't just outproduce us. You revolutionized amphibious warfare itself through industrial capacity to build specialized vehicles. We brought conventional defensive doctrine to warfare against industrial innovation. Additional Japanese officers provided testimony corroborating the industrial disparity. Captain Tadao Onuki testified, "We brought rifle fire and artillery to a battle against unlimited naval gunfire and mechanized assault. Your material advantages exceeded tactical compensation. A well-positioned defender with superior training should defeat 3 attackers. Your defenders at Tarawa faced 1 numerical superiority supported by naval vessels that fired more ammunition in hours than we possessed for months. The ratio became meaningless." Lieutenant Maso Hayashi testified, "Their excess capacity exceeded our maximum effort. They could lose 200 amphibious vehicles and replace them in 2 weeks. We built 100 similar craft in a year. They could expend 100,000 artillery shells and produce replacements in days. We rationed shells for critical engagements. The industrial disparity made tactical victory impossible." Major Yoshio Takeda, a battalion commander who survived the battle, provided statistical analysis. "They could lose 3 Sherman tanks and replace them from a single week's production. We possessed 3 tanks total for the entire garrison, built over 3 months. They could afford to waste ammunition suppressing potential targets. We rationed ammunition strictly, firing only at confirmed targets. They could deploy 242 amphibious tractors to land 18,000 troops. We possessed 14 landing craft total. The mathematics were catastrophic. Your single amphibious operation employed more specialized vessels than our entire Pacific Fleet possessed." Lieutenant Commander Sugai provided final production statistics based on intelligence gathered throughout the war. American production in 1943 reached levels we initially dismissed as propaganda or intelligence errors. You produced 35,000 landing craft of all types in 1943. We produced 1,200 mostly converted civilian vessels. You produced 2,400 specialized amphibious tractors. We produced 0 equivalent vehicles. Your single factory in San Francisco exceeded our national amphibious vehicle output by ratios of 5, 1 monthly. Entire American industries dedicated to amphibious warfare exceeded our total military production allocation for all categories. You didn't defeat us with superior tactics or training. You buried us with production capacity that exceeded our ability to comprehend, much less match." Captain Kiyoshi Amano, naval construction officer, testified about waste observations during captivity. "American guards discarded food that our garrison would have treasured. I watched American personnel throw away damaged equipment that our engineers would have repaired and reused. Americans replaced components we would have maintained indefinitely. I observed supply depots discarding ammunition crates because of minor water damage. We would have dried the ammunition and used it. Americans had the luxury of waste. We survived through absolute economy. Your abundance exceeded our scarcity by ratios impossible to calculate. You produced so much that waste became economically rational. We conserved so carefully that every nail mattered. Senior surviving Japanese officers provided consensus assessment. The lesson of Tarawa was industrial capacity determines modern warfare more than tactical excellence, strategic position, or defensive engineering. Commander Shibasaki had built the strongest defensive position in the Pacific using every resource available. American industrial production overcame concrete, steel, artillery, and determined defenders through simple abundance. You landed enough troops to overwhelm defenders. You fired enough shells to destroy positions. You possessed enough vehicles to sustain assault momentum. You could afford losses we could never accept. Modern warfare had become industrial warfare. We lost when Japanese factories could not match American production in 1941. Tarawa demonstrated that conclusion with mathematical precision. The amphibious tractors proved that democratic industrial capitalism could outproduce authoritarian command economies. Free workers at the Food Machinery Corporation plant produced 510 vehicles monthly through efficient assembly line methods, motivated by wages and working conditions, empowered to suggest improvements, and supported by abundant raw materials. Japanese workers produced fewer than 30 similar vehicles monthly under strict military oversight, motivated by duty and coercion, forbidden from suggesting modifications, and constrained by material shortages. Democratic cooperation between government and industry exceeded totalitarian command through flexibility, innovation, and resource abundance. Industrial abundance buried ideological superiority under literal tons of steel. Americans produced 89 million tons of steel in 1943, while Japan produced 7.8 million tons. The disparity was 11:1. Tarawa demonstrated what that ratio meant in combat: attackers who could lose vehicles, expend ammunition freely, and replace losses faster than defenders could inflict them. The Industrial Revolution in amphibious warfare proved that free nations innovating to solve military problems could create capabilities that centrally planned economies could not match. Donald Roebling had developed the LVT as a civilian rescue vehicle for Florida swamps. The military adapted it for amphibious assault. American engineers modified the design incorporating feedback from Marine training exercises. The vehicle evolved rapidly through iterative improvement driven by user requirements rather than central planning. By November 1943, the LVT-2 incorporated 47 design improvements from the original LVT-1, each modification suggested by workers, Marines, or engineers testing vehicles. Japanese amphibious vehicles were designed by Central Command and produced without modification because changing approved designs required bureaucratic authorization that took months. American innovation occurred continuously. Japanese innovation occurred bureaucratically. The waste comparisons revealed the fundamental difference between economies of abundance and scarcity. Americans could afford to discard defective components, replace damaged equipment, and expend ammunition freely because production exceeded consumption. Japan had to repair everything, reuse components indefinitely, and ration ammunition strictly because production could barely maintain reserves. American abundance enabled tactical flexibility. Commanders could request ammunition without worrying about depleting reserves. Japanese scarcity enforced tactical rigidity. Commanders rationed ammunition knowing reserves couldn't be replenished. The economic foundation determined tactical possibilities. Americans could employ firepower-intensive tactics because their economy supported unlimited ammunition expenditure. Japanese forces employed maneuver-intensive tactics because their economy couldn't support American-style firepower. The systematic annihilation of Betio's garrison demonstrated industrial warfare's nature. This wasn't warfare where tactical excellence or defensive positions provided advantages. This was warfare where one side possessed so much material superiority that tactical skill became irrelevant. American forces could make tactical mistakes, suffer casualties, and still overwhelmed defenders through sheer abundance of resources. Japanese forces could execute perfect tactics, occupy ideal defensive positions, and still lose because they couldn't match American material expenditure. The battle became mathematical rather than tactical. Could defenders inflict casualties faster than attackers replaced losses? The answer was no. American monthly amphibious production exceeded Japanese annual capacity. Americans could lose every vehicle at Tarawa and replace them in 2 weeks. September 12, 1943. Commander Keiji Shibasaki had laughed at American amphibious capabilities, dismissing intelligence about specialized vehicles and production capacity. November 23, 1943. Shibasaki was dead, killed leading a final counterattack. His garrison was annihilated. His impregnable fortress was captured in 76 hours. The island he had fortified with 500 pillboxes fell to 18,000 Marines, delivered by specialized vehicles he had dismissed. His mockery became history's most complete miscalculation, measured in the total destruction of a defended position that should have been impregnable against conventional assault. The mathematics he had trusted, defender advantages, fortified positions, reef barriers, meant nothing against industrial capacity to produce enough specialized vehicles to overcome every defensive advantage. The lesson remains: dismissing democratic nations as weak because they prefer peace or underestimating free people's productive capacity invites catastrophic miscalculation. Industrial democracies mobilizing for war achieve production levels that authoritarian states cannot match. Free workers outproduce coerced labor. Democratic cooperation between government and industry exceeds centralized command. Economic abundance enables tactical flexibility while scarcity enforces rigidity. The mathematics become simple. The side that can produce more weapons, equip more soldiers, and replace losses faster wins regardless of tactics, training, or defensive positions. Tarawa proved this lesson with 4,690 Japanese dead, and one destroyed defensive position that should have been impregnable, but fell to industrial warfare's simple arithmetic. Abundance defeats scarcity, production overwhelms fortification, and democratic capitalism outproduces authoritarian command.